Got a question to ponder as we begin the lesson today, and this is it possible that too much faith can actually cause someone to stop believing in God? Right? How could it be that someone could actually have too much faith, and their too much faith could make them stop believing in God? It seems probably impossible, but I just want you to think about that. Talking about faith today because we've been looking at the whole armor of God. And looking at the armor of God because the armor of God is what Ephesians 6 says is a gift from God in order to help us stand firm against the attacks of Satan. That the devil's got all of these schemes, all these lies, all these ways that he is actively trying to go against the church as a whole and us as individuals, and in a way that the Apostle Paul tells us that we can kind of stand firm and be strong in this battle, in this spiritual warfare, that our battle is not against flesh and blood, but about the principalities and the spiritual forces that are out there and against the devil's schemes. And so we've gone through already and we've touched on the importance of truth and righteousness, the belt of truth and the breastplate of righteousness. And last week we talked about being the readiness that comes with having good news shoes, having the shoes of the gospel strapped on our feet. And then that was in verse 15, and verse 16 says, in addition to all this, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. So God, in this armor, is gifted us faith, and faith can act like a shield. So there's the kind of the immediate armor that's right attached to our body, but faith can kind of be out there in front of us and even extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. So maybe they don't even really get to us. So in that vein, if faith is meant to be a shield, how could it be that faith could cause someone to stop believing? And the reason is because we have the wrong definition of faith in our brains and the wrong definition of faith in our lives. And so what happens is you will hear someone, and I think probably most of us have had some kind of encounter and conversation that has been like this, where someone that you're talking to says, I don't believe in God anymore. Or I don't know if I believe in God anymore. And when you start to dig and ask some questions, get to the bottom of it, they reveal to you an unanswered prayer. Are you with me? We have been praying about this situation, and we have been praying diligently, and we have beaten ourselves up because we thought, God's not answering. Maybe we just need to have more faith. And so we prayed, and 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 then we prayed a little more, and then we asked other people to pray, and we asked for them to ask even more people to pray, and God didn't answer our prayer, so therefore, God must not exist. We had so much faith, too much of the wrong kind of faith, too much of a faith that isn't really faith at all. And because of that led to not believing in God. Well, what? Okay, what are we talking about? All right. Well, we're in church and we're talking about faith, so we've got to go here. And Hebrews 11:1 is a great verse. And it's one of those verses that says, this is what it says. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and the assurance about what we do not see. And that is the kind of thing that we hear. And I think it's one of those things that another kind of common experience I think we've had is when you're in school and the teacher's like, and this is the definition. And we're like, oh, yeah. And then they ask you to use it in a sentence, or they ask you to kind of expound on that, and you're just dumbfounded. Right? Like, I know what it means, but I don't really know what it means. And these are nice words, and we love to quote this verse. Oh yeah, faith. Confidence in what we hope for, the assurance of what we do not see. I mean, so many of us can quote some version of that. Some of you still have the King James Version in your brains. And that's good. But what does it really mean? And what happens is when we put our kind of worldly definition on this, then confidence in what we hope for becomes, I believe that God is going to give me what I really want, deep down. So whatever that thing might be, if it is that new job, I've just not really been enjoying this job. I feel stuck. I feel quenched, or whatever. I'm just feeling like I'm not really being utilized to the best of my ability. And I have been praying that God will give me a new opportunity. That is just my heart's desire, right? And for me to put that on God is not faith. That is selfishness. And that might be hard to hear. You have someone, maybe you are the person that found out that you're sick. You've got some bad disease. Or maybe it's someone very close to you. And so you pray to God in faith of what you hope for, right? Faith, hoping God will heal this person. I just know it. I just know it so deep down inside that God is going to make them better. Why? Because I just hope in it. It's what I'm hoping for. And I have faith because I'm confident in what I hope for. But what do we do if God does not answer that prayer? If he does not heal that person? We get mad at God? Do we lose faith? What was our faith based on? And the assurance about what we do not see. What does that mean? So I think if we actually look through Hebrews 11 and start to, the rest of the chapter we know is full of examples of people who walked by faith. By faith. Verse 7, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in a holy fear built an ark to save his family. Verse 8, by faith Abraham, when he was called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went. Verse 11, by faith Sarah, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who made the promise. By faith, verse 17, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice, who had embraced the promises, he who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. So God had made this promise to Abraham that he was going to become a great nation, and yet his kind of only son that could happen through, God says, I want you now to go and sacrifice this son. And so this is what it says. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. By faith, Moses, verse 24, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. So as we go through, and we're not going to read every verse of Hebrews 11, there are two things that stand out and that are very clear about the people, the men and women of faith that are highlighted in Hebrews chapter 11 that reflect very much on verse 1. One thing that came up a lot in those first examples that I read was what they did was based off of a promise that they had received from God. Their hope was not fleeting. Their hope was not generated from their hearts and their desires. Their hope was based on a promise that God had given them. God said, I am going to make you into a great nation. God said, I want you to go. And so in that knowledge and that relationship with knowing who God was and what he had told them or what he had called them to do, their response was a response of faith. They hoped in a promise. They hoped in a God who had established himself as, I'm going to do this thing. It was not just a whim. It was not just an I want. And then, like when we get into Moses, Moses' situation, that was a little different. I read verse 24. When he grew up, he refused to be known as the Pharaoh's son, or son of the Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated with God's people rather than enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. And so we see, and the assurance of what we do not see is what if Moses was basing his life, and all these other examples, if they were basing their life and actions on what they were seeing, then they would have gone after the pleasures of sin. The here and now, the things that are going to warm us now, make us feel good now. And so there's an aspect of faith is understanding the reality of the spiritual realm. So here's the two things is faith is not a whim, not a want, not a desire, not my projecting all of my stuff onto God, not making God in my image, but faith is action based on promises. And it's understanding the reality of the spiritual realm. So that when I look out and we look and we see each other, we don't see big, tall, short, fat, skinny, blonde, dark-haired, black, white, Hispanic. Look, we don't see that. I mean, and I'm not discounting that stuff. What we see is souls. What we see is images of God. Right? Like, it's because what we have done, what has happened to us is that we have been transformed and we have been changed. And so a part of us walking by faith is that I'm not trapped by the world anymore. And so this is the confidence. It's living in a confidence of what we hope for. What are we hoping for? Well, what are the promises that God has given us? What are the assurances that we know? What are the things that God tells us will be true for us and in our lives? Faith is not belief without commitment. It's action and it's understanding about what this world really is going on. So, there's 4 different times in the Gospel of Matthew that Jesus speaks to his disciples and he uses a phrase. He says, "Ye of little faith." You of little faith. So this is kind of interesting. We're going to look at those 4 instances and try to learn from that. So we kind of have this basic understanding of a big reason that we struggle with faith is because we have a faulty definition of faith that we've absorbed, that we've lightened. And so oftentimes we think that we're praying in faith and we're acting in faith, but really what we're motivated is by our own desires and our own hopes. And not that that is utterly evil, but that can throw us off. And that can send us down the wrong line. And so what we want to do is we want to be walking in a way in which my life, our lives, are based on God's promises and the reality of spiritual warfare. That it's legit, that it's real, that is really happening and going on. And that what we see and what we're encountering is only part of what is real. All right. And going off the idea that faith actually is a shield for us. Faith is not a time bomb that when eventually we don't get what we were asking for, that's going to explode in our faces, but a shield that is supposed to protect us. All right, this is not the first one, but the one that we're going to start with is Matthew 8, is actually the whole sermon series is called Peace Be Still, and it's from this account, this story of Jesus in the boat. And Jesus is in the boat, and he gets in the boat, and immediately, it says immediately when he gets in the boat, that the winds and the waves, they just start raging. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake, so the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. So it's just an amazing encounter. And so we think about all of the ways that this could be connected to our lives, right? And how the analogies that could be placed is there's all of this storm raging. There's all the winds. The waves are crashing in over the boat. And Jesus is on this boat, and Jesus is asleep. He has peace. Now, in Mark's account is where Jesus stands up and rebukes the waves, and he rebukes the wind, and he says, "Peace, be still." And I wonder if in Jesus, in his doing that, I always kind of picture him kind of on the front of the boat. Is that the bow? All right. On the bow of the boat, with his arms out wide, just kind of shouting, "Peace, be still." But I wonder if some of those words might have also been directed to the disciples behind him. Like, and you guys too. Chill out. But what he says to them is he says, and this is in Matthew 26, in 25, the disciples went and woke him up saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown, which to you and and so I will admit to you that this account of Jesus on the boat with his disciples in the storm, I am a bit confused by. And if you have extra insight and would like to talk to me afterwards, I would love that. Because to me, it feels like the disciples did the right thing. We're in this terrible storm. There's nothing we can do to fix it. But we've got Jesus on the boat, right? Like, this makes a ton of sense. He's sleeping. Who knows why or how? But, like, you can kind of tell. Like, somebody's probably, no, don't wake him up. He looks so cute. And somebody's like, no, we've got, this is our only hope. We've got to wake him up. And so finally somebody pulls the short straw, and they have to, Jesus, I don't know what's going to wake him up in the storm. I'm going to have to shove Jesus, right? I'm going to have to smack him or something to get him up. And you'd think that maybe that Jesus is like, wow, you guys have such great faith because in the midst of this storm, you came and you got me. But that's not what he says. He says, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up and he rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Verse 27 says, the men were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. And so what we see, though, and this is kind of what we're going to do is, so they had just a little faith. He says, ye of little faith, and that led to fear. Jesus says it directly. Ye of little faith, why were you afraid? Why were you so afraid? If we go back 2 chapters to Matthew chapter 6, this is Jesus talking in his Sermon on the Mount, and he's in the section about don't worry. Don't worry, and he says this here in verse 28. And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They don't labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. You start to see a pattern here. Jesus starting it. Okay, so if you have just a little bit of faith, then that's going to lead to worry. If you have just a little bit of faith, that's going to lead to fear. But you see these two things, Jesus' teaching and then Jesus' encounter, what was happening? With don't worry, and what is his rebuke is your minds are, don't worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear, what you're going to drink, like on the physical, on the here and now, on the world around us, the worldly things. They were upset about the storm. What was that? The worldly. They were missing some aspect of the spiritual reality. Account number 3 is Matthew 14, back in the water. The disciples are out there on their own. And immediately in verse 22, Jesus made they got in the boat. 25. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. This is Jesus walking on the water. Matthew 14. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost. It's a ghost, they said. And they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Peter says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come out to you on the water. I'm almost to what's on the screen, sorry. And verse 29, Jesus says, come. So Peter says, if it's really you, Jesus, and you're not just a ghost, tell me and I'll come walk on the water with you. So Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. And then we pick up at verse 30. But when he saw the wind, right, here's the pattern of losing focus on the spiritual realm, losing focus in the faith walk, and walking by faith and not by sight, but getting caught up in what we see in the physical realm and the worldly things. He saw the wind and he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Again, this could be a moment of faith. He's sinking. God, save me. But Jesus reached out his hand and caught him, and he said, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? So faith leads to fear. Lack of faith leads to fear. Lack of faith leads to worry. Lack of faith leads to doubt. Lastly, this one's a little different. They've just fed the 5,000. Jesus starts to talk to them a little bit about the Pharisees, and he tells them about the Pharisees. You got to watch out for those guys. And the analogy that he uses is, he says, because you got to be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So like yeast, that analogy is used in a couple of different Bibles. A little bit of yeast, right, can work through the whole batch of dough. And so be on guard. Watch out, guys, for the yeast of the Pharisees, to which, in verse 7 of Matthew 16, the disciples say, is he saying that because we forgot the bread? And this picks up in verse 8. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked, you of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Jesus was talking about bread, right? Do you still not understand? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000 and how many baskets full you gathered? And so there's an aspect of this in which, and he goes on, or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many baskets you gathered when it was left over. How is it that you don't understand that I was talking to you, not talking about bread? Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Verse 12 says, then they understood that he was telling them to guard against not against the yeast used in bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And so lack of faith can make us worry. It can make us fearful. It can affect our understanding, right? Because if faith is walking not by sight, then that means when we hear the things of God, when we hear the spiritual teaching of Jesus, if we get so caught up in the physical things, we'll make mistakes like thinking that having faith is believing that God's going to give me what I really, really want. And so in that way, when somebody might say, oh, you're praying, you just need to have some more faith, and Jesus was there, Jesus would say to the person that said, you need to have more faith, he would say to them, ye of little faith. Because what you think is faith is not faith at all. Do you still not understand? Why? And you're gripped with worry and fear? Do you still not get it? So if a lack of faith leads to all those things, then having faith, and faith that could be like a shield, could lead to peace and having courage and assurance and understanding. And not that is blind, not as that is lacking any understanding, not as just, well, I can do whatever I want because God's on my side. Or whatever we do, wherever we step out, God will take care of us, unless there's a promise you can stand on. Your hope has to be built on some foundation, that is truth. But then we can have these things. We can be walking by faith. And so, again, our hope is that faith can be a shield for us. And if you think about that, and you start to deny more and more of the physical trappings of this world, and so you worry less about, well, what am I going to eat? What am I going to wear? How are we going to figure that out? How are we going to accomplish that thing? What are we going to do next week? And you can move beyond that. And you can get to a place where you're starting to see the spiritual realities of things. You don't get upset with the person, but you know that there's something going on deeper in that person's life. And that's what the concern should be. You're worrying less, you're less afraid, you're understanding more. And so it makes sense then, if Satan is the prince of this world, and he's using lies and deception, and he's using your flesh and your ties to this world to attack you. And that's a big part of his schemes, is to get you caught up more and more in the world and to worry more and more about this world. And when things are going on in this world, that you get more and more afraid that if you are walking by faith, that those arrows won't even touch you. They won't even get close because you're walking by faith. And so all of his, and have you seen that when one of your kids finally figures it out? You know, there's like the traps that we all use. I was a great younger brother. Anybody? Like, I knew all the buttons to press to get my sisters really upset. Until they figured it out, right? Until they're like, oh, if I just don't react, then Rob will stop. And that did not make me happy. And then we ended up becoming friends. Imagine that. But not that we're going to become friends with Satan, but that's the deal, right? Is Satan is running after us. He's chasing after us. He's seeking for people to devour. And if you're walking by faith and he shoots some of those arrows and they extinguish, they're hitting that shield of faith. He's not happy about that. But he's probably just going to keep going. But you have shielded yourself with faith. So here's the call to action. Two things. Either way, you can go with this. Number one, I would like for you to just spend, and maybe it's happened already in the last 25 minutes, evaluate or reevaluate how you view, this is more specific to our topic, how do you view and judge mental illness? Because a lot of times, what was happening in our American Christian past is, if you're dealing with mental illness, then that's a sign of a lack of faith. And you just need to pray more about it. And you need to pray more faithfully about it. So I call you to reevaluate that. And not just that, but how we view prayer as a treatment and cure for physical issues, but also mental issues, mental health issues. Just ponder that a little. What does faith look? What are the promises that we have to stand on? Does God say that he will heal every single wound we get? Does God promise us that he's going to take away every infirmary, that he's going to heal every sickness? When Jesus was on earth, did he walk around and heal every single person that was sick that was around him? Is that the promise of God? Or is our hope built on something else? And number two, to know that faith shields us. That Satan is the prince of this world, and that you just kind of walk away today with that calm assurance of, and this world is not my home. This world is not my home. I'm just passing through. And my treasures are laid up somewhere beyond the blue. And so we can walk in that assurance. We can know that Satan's trying to get us, and he's trying to get us with these worldly things. But that's not where my hope is. Let's stand together, and we're going to sing a song. And as we sing, I encourage you to contemplate some of these things.